Hello, my AP US history friends. Hope you are feeling good on this Friday, 3-day weekend coming up. I have a lot to cover here in this recap video. Going to try to do it as quick as I can because obviously we had 3 whole classes, so it's a lot to cover. Anyways, housekeeping really quick. I moved your test back a class block because I'm just not going to get to the material. So it's no longer next Friday, which also moves your homework packet back. I realize the Tuesday that you're going to be in class with me it's not Tuesday. Or yeah, it will be. That next Tuesday is a half day. So we're going to have to do the multiple choice in one class. We got about 45 minutes-ish in that class, and it's about 30 multiple choice questions for this unit, so we should be able to get that done easy. And then the second half of the next class, which is on Thursday after the PSATs, we will do the writing portion. You're going to have to pick 1 of 2 SAQs to write, and then you're going to have to pick 1 of 2 LEQ prompts to write an intro paragraph for, like we did in our writing workshop. You'll also have a writing workshop next week in Flex, so you'll have more time to cover it. But on to the content. So we had a quiz on Monday, and we followed that quiz up afterwards by learning about the Articles of Confederation. They are the first governing document of the United States after the victory in the American Revolution. The key points about them, why they're important, it's not a very good document. Weak central government, a lot of state power, a lot of people power. This is done because of the abuses of the British monarchy. We're trying to create a government that's not like them, right? We did the whole relationship example on the board that I hope you remembered it. But basically, the British were our spouse or our partner that, no longer had our interests at heart, so we broke up with them, right? After we become our own country, right, the Articles of Confederation, we started dating somebody else that's not like the British at all. They're the exact opposite. They have no central government or very limited central government. The people are allowed to do a lot of the things that they want to do. But that relationship doesn't work well either because you need some structure, right? Anyways, one good thing about the Articles of Confederation is land organization. If anybody ever asks you the positive of the Articles of Confederation, one, we all signed the document, so everybody's on the same page, so that's good. But secondly, the Northwest Land Ordinance of 1787, we keep that in the Constitution, and it's how we reorganize land to put in states. So that's like the one positive, right? Negatives, obviously weak central government. The federal government can raise an army, but they can't collect taxes, so they can't pay for anything. So even if the federal government had power, they couldn't pay for any of it because they couldn't tax. Right? This is shown in Shays' Rebellion. This is really the death nail of the Articles of Confederation. Shays' Rebellion, led by Captain Daniel Shays, American Revolution vet, gathers together a whole bunch of farmers and also American Revolution vets. They were all farmers, right? And they protest against the state of Massachusetts for levying taxes on them. The states have debt from the American Revolution because the federal government hasn't consolidated it yet. Just wait for Hamilton. No federal government to do that. So they have protests against their state government. Massachusetts looks to the federal government to put it down. The federal government's like, with what army? So Massachusetts has to raise their own militia and put it down. It takes a while. And it's not an effective way to enforce law. Right? So Shays' Rebellion leads to the end of the Articles of Confederation and then the Constitutional Convention. We did like a whole web quest on the Constitution. Right? Remember, we saw like the Washington quote where he was like, if you had told me 3 years before the writing of the Articles of Confederation, we'd already have a rebellion, I'd say you were crazy. Shays' Rebellion shows that you're crazy, I guess, right? So we have to meet in the Constitutional Convention. AP really cares about the compromises that lead to the Constitution. That's really the big part they care about the most. So we did outline them, but we'll start with the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The Federalists are a political party that like the federal government. They want stronger federal power. Some, even on the extreme end, like Hamilton and Adams, much even more so like a monarchy than anything else. But obviously we don't want that. The Anti-Federalists are the exact opposite. They don't like federal power. They like state and people power. So they have to come to a series of compromises to pass the Constitution. How do they do this? The Bill of Rights. You're going to see a guy named Elbridge Gerry have this big article in Multiple Choice, a document about him, and he's basically just saying, we could have a federal government, but it needs to protect people's rights. So in order to get the Anti-Federalists to sign this thing, we must include the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Like 1, freedom of expression. 2, the right to bear arms. Don't really care about 3. 4, the right to privacy. 5 and 6 are your rights on criminal trials. 7's about civil lawsuits. 8 is cruel and unusual punishment. No cruel and unusual punishment. And 9 and 10 are what the states and what the people can do. Things that are not listed in the Constitution, like marriage or education, right? Are not listed in the Constitution, so they become state or individual powers, right? So that's the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. If I had to say like the leaders of each of these sides, the Anti-Federalist leaders are like Thomas Jefferson, Elbridge Gerry. The Anti-Federalists are Hamilton, John Adams, right? Anyways, other compromises. We need to also settle issues between the big states and the small states, not just the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The big states want a House of Representatives based on people, population, right? That's known as the Virginia Plan because Virginia is a big state. So they want more power. So they say, hey, we should create a legislature that's based on the amount of people in your state. The small states don't like this, right? Specifically New Jersey, who's the small state at the time, right? They are going to say we want a legislature, a Senate that is made up of 2 representatives from each state, right? They can't come to an agreement, so Connecticut steps in and has what's known as the Great Compromise or the Connecticut Compromise. That's why Constitution is on your license plate. Basically, we're going to take these 2 together and create what's known as a bicameral legislature that have to work together to pass laws. So the small states, you get your equal representation. The big states, you get your population representation. You all have to work together, though. That's the compromise, right? We also have compromises not only between Federalists and Anti-Federalists, big states and small states, but slave states and free states, or mostly free states, states with not a lot of slaves, right? Some of them have outlawed slavery at this point, others have not. Anyways, this compromise is going to be known as the 3/5 compromise, where essentially the South wants to count all of their slaves as people, so they can count them as representation, but they don't want to give them rights as people. Like I had mentioned before, slavery is more of a political and economic issue. It eventually becomes a moral issue, right? You're going to get abolitionists like Frederick Douglass and Thaddeus Stevens and Harriet Beecher Stowe writes Uncle Tom's Cabin. It eventually becomes a moral and ethical issue, like slavery's bad. But for now, it's a political and economic issue. Politically, the South wants equal or more representation in the House, so they want to count their slaves as one person. The North is like, that's garbage. You can't do that unless you want to give them equality. So the South is like, all right, we'll count them as 3/5 of a person, and the North agrees. It also agrees to end the slave trade by I think 1807 or 1810 or something. No one's ever going to ask you the specific date. But that is the 3/5 compromise. It's the other important one. The Constitution as a whole, right, balances power between 3 branches of government. It has checks and balances between those branches of government. So it is a much more balanced document than the Articles of Confederation were. And it's shown to be an effective document in the Whiskey Rebellion. We'll get there in a minute, right? So that's mostly the Constitution. Again, they care more about how you got there, the series of compromises, than the actual things in it. But, the Bill of Rights, the balance of power, the checks and balances, rule of law, branches of government, all that stuff they do want you to know. Okay, getting into George Washington now, what we did in class today. Washington's our first president. He's actually, under the Constitution, he's definitely the best guy for the job. Even if he wasn't one of the wealthiest, one of the most intelligent, one of the most athletic people, he's a national hero. He's almost a folk hero at this point. So he adds legitimacy to the new federal government. People are going to trust it if Washington leads it. Right? Because it doesn't matter if you're from Virginia, Washington's home state, South Carolina, or Connecticut, or New Hampshire. Washington's your guy, right? So we trust him. So he's a good person to pick. He's the only unanimously elected president by the Electoral College ever. He resides in New York City because DC's not a thing yet. Don't worry, it will be. And I nickname him Mr. Precedent with a C, not president with an S, even though I just said that with a Z, right? Anyways, I call him that because he sets all the things that future presidents are going to do, right? Not run for more than 2 terms. Be called Mr. President. Have a cabinet and listen to that cabinet, right? Are all things that are going to be set to move forward for the president, right? Speaking of cabinets, right, the cabinet is pretty significant. They are the group of advisors for the president. They also run executive departments, so they're in charge of different branches, or not branches. They're in charge of different things that the federal government does. So the 2 that I told you I really care about are Secretary of State, which runs the foreign issues. That's going to be really important for the early U.S. because we need legitimacy. We need other countries to recognize us. We need other countries to have relationships with us, send ambassadors to us, let us borrow money from you. All those things that would then mean we're a country. Right? So state's important. Again, Thomas Jefferson, he's the right guy for the job for that too. And then Secretary of Treasury, it's Alexander Hamilton. He's probably the guy that Washington listens to the most. They fought together in the American Revolution. And he's Secretary of the Treasury. He handles all the money issues. We're going to start out with the Treasury and looking at that. Financial issues are probably the biggest pressing issue for America at the time, other than rebellions that they need to put down. So Hamilton comes up with a financial plan where he wants to, one, consolidate all the debt from the states into the federal government. This will allow the federal government to establish credit so they can prove to other countries that they can borrow money from them, which again gives us legitimacy in the world stage, right? We can also take the burden off of the states. So the states no longer have to worry about their debt. So no more like Shays rebellions happening on the side, right? He also wants to raise taxes, specifically on tariffs, so the things that are being traded, to try to generate more American manufacturing. When tariffs go up, it costs more money to buy things from around the world, so then people buy more things at home. That's what we want. We want money to stay here, right? We also raise taxes on specifically whiskey, which obviously becomes a problem, right? And then lastly, we print central currency. We no longer North Carolina, South Carolina, Connecticut money. It's just U.S. money, which is big for trade. It makes trade easier. So that's a big federalist plan. Obviously, that gives a ton of power to the federal government because they'll be in charge of money. The group that does not like that, the anti-federalists, mostly Southerners at this point, do not want this, and they fight against the Hamilton Financial Plan until a trade is made in the Compromise of 1790, where the Hamilton Financial Plan will be accepted, right? In exchange, the South gets the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., built in the South. It's between Virginia and Maryland on the Potomac River, which is the South, right? So that's where they want. It's also pretty much the middle of the country, but that's what they get in the trade, right? Moving forward to the end of what we covered in class, if we got to it, I know it was a little bit of a difference between first period or second block and fourth block, what we got to, right? The Whiskey Rebellion. Basically, you're going to have a whole bunch of whiskey makers, farmers. They're mostly corn. Corn makes whiskey. Luke Bryan song. Rain is a good thing. But anyways, the whiskey farmers, the corn farmers that make whiskey are not happy about the taxes raised against them. So they have a rebellion called the Whiskey Rebellion against the U.S. federal government, in which Washington himself puts down. So he's able to do that, which shows the Constitution is strong. I think my second block got to this, so I'll cover it. Fourth block, no, but we'll get to it in the next class. The French Revolution is happening at the same time, and Washington has a foreign decision to make. It's whether the U.S. is going to take the side of King Louis XVI or the French revolutionaries, who are like, hey man, didn't you just have a revolution against a king? Don't you want to support our Declaration of Rights and all that stuff? But Washington decides to keep the country neutral. He thought that basically as a new country, we had a lot of problems to solve at home, and we can't be spending money or sending troops abroad when our country's already pretty fragile. We need to stick together, and this is an issue that could divide the whole country in half, so we don't want to do that. So Washington proclaims neutrality, which is a big thing about him. It's a star, exclamation point. Anyways, I know that was a long one, but I had a lot to do. Hope you have a great weekend. See you next week.